On a bustling street in the heart of Maplewood, Anna's calm walk was suddenly interrupted by the sharp voice of Officer Oliver. His eyes locked onto the gleaming gold necklace around her neck, a cherished gift from her husband, Lucas, the city's police chief. "Where did you get that necklace?" Oliver demanded, his tone harsh and accusatory. Anna turned, her expression composed yet firm. "It's mine. A gift from my husband," she replied. But Oliver wasn't interested in explanations. Fueled by prejudice and misplaced authority, he saw only what he wanted to see: a suspect, not a person. The tension escalated as Oliver tightened his grip on the situation, ignoring Anna's pleas and dragging her to the police station in handcuffs, determined to prove her guilt. Bookmark. What he didn't realize was that this reckless act would set in motion a series of events that would not only challenge his beliefs, but also redefine his understanding of justice and humanity. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story of injustice, redemption, and transformation, comment below where you're watching from today. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on more inspiring tales like this one. On a warm afternoon in Maplewood, a bustling city known for its vibrant energy and lively streets, the air was filled with the sounds of everyday life. Crowds wandered through shopping malls, small cafes lined the cobblestone streets, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. Amid the hustle and bustle, Anna strolled along the sidewalk, her elegant posture and graceful movements naturally drawing attention. Anna wore a light, flowing dress that perfectly complemented her slender frame, exuding an aura of confidence and sophistication. Around her neck gleamed a stunning gold necklace, catching the rays of sunlight as she walked. This wasn't merely an accessory, it was a cherished symbol of love, gifted to her by her husband, Lucas. Lucas, the highly respected police chief of Maplewood, had given it to her on their 10th wedding anniversary. Bookmark. The necklace represented more than luxury. It was a tangible reminder of Lucas's unwavering love and commitment to Anna. Despite his demanding career, Lucas was a man deeply devoted to justice and fairness, as well as to his family. To him, Anna was the center of his world, and his thoughtful gift only reinforced the bond they shared. Meanwhile, parked at a nearby street corner, Officer Oliver leaned casually against his patrol car, sipping a cup of steaming coffee. Despite his years of experience, Oliver was infamous among his colleagues for his arrogance and condescending attitude. To him, the police badge symbolized power more than responsibility, a means to exert authority over others, particularly those he unfairly judged. As Anna walked past him, Oliver's eyes were immediately drawn to the sparkling gold necklace adorning her neck. But his attention wasn't motivated by admiration for its craftsmanship. Instead, it was fueled by his deeply ingrained prejudices. Unlike the many passers-by who avoided eye contact with police officers, Anna walked with unwavering confidence, her head held high. This demeanor rubbed Oliver the wrong way. To him, Anna's poised and composed behavior was a challenge to his perceived authority. A smug smile crept across his face as he placed his coffee cup on the hood of the car and cleared his throat loudly. "Hey, you!" Oliver called out, his voice sharp and commanding. Anna paused mid-step, turning gracefully to face him. Her expression remained calm, though a flicker of surprise flashed in her eyes. "Yes, officer," she replied, her tone polite but assertive. Oliver's eyes narrowed as he stepped toward her, his gaze fixated on the gold necklace. "That necklace," he began, his voice heavy with suspicion. "Where did you get it?" Anna's brows knitted slightly, but she maintained her composure. "It's a gift from my husband," she answered, her voice steady and clear. Oliver crossed his arms, his tone growing more accusatory. "A gift, huh? Looks pretty expensive. Are you sure it's yours?" He paused as if contemplating his next words before adding, "There's been a recent string of jewelry thefts in the area, and you match the description of one of the suspects." Anna met his gaze firmly, her voice unwavering. "I'm not sure what thefts you're referring to, but I can assure you this necklace is mine, and I've done nothing wrong." However, Oliver's smirk only deepened, his prejudice and sense of superiority fueling his demeanor. "Sounds familiar," he sneered. "People like you always have excuses. Let's settle this at the station." Anna inhaled deeply, the injustice in his words cutting through her resolve. But she refused to let her frustration show. "Officer, I suggest you reconsider your decision," she said, her voice calm but firm. Oliver stepped closer, his expression full of smug satisfaction. "Do you really think you can fool me with a story about your husband?" he scoffed, gripping a pair of handcuffs tightly in his hand. "That necklace doesn't belong to you." Anna squared her shoulders and met his gaze with quiet determination. "Officer, I've been clear. This necklace is mine, and I've done nothing to warrant this treatment." Oliver ignored her words, his irritation mounting. "Save your stories for the station," he snapped. "Turn around." For a moment, Anna hesitated, her mind racing with the injustice of the situation. But instead of resisting, she slipped her hand discreetly into her coat pocket and pressed the emergency button on her phone. A silent signal that would immediately alert Lucas. As Oliver fastened the cold metal handcuffs around Anna's wrists, he couldn't resist a self-satisfied smirk. "All right, into the car," he ordered. Despite the stares from onlookers, Anna walked toward the patrol car with her head held high. Inside, she silently observed the streets of Maplewood, her mind focused on what would come next. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was standing up against prejudice and injustice for everyone who had ever been unfairly targeted. As Oliver drove toward the Maplewood police station, his smug expression reflected in the rearview mirror. He glanced at Anna through the reflection, his demeanor dripping with condescension. "You know," he began, his tone casual yet tinged with mockery, "people like you always think you can outsmart the law. But let me tell you something, you can't." Anna sat in the back seat, her wrists still cuffed, the metal biting into her skin. Despite the discomfort, she kept her posture upright, refusing to show weakness. She stared out the window, silently observing the familiar streets of the city she had lived in for years. Every landmark reminded her that she wasn't just fighting for herself. This was about something far bigger. "I don't think you understand the gravity of your actions, officer," Anna replied calmly, her voice carrying an undertone of quiet defiance. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Oliver shot back, his smirk widening. "You're walking around with stolen property, trying to act all innocent. But don't worry, the truth will come out soon enough." Anna didn't respond. She knew there was no point in arguing with someone so consumed by their biases. Instead, she silently trusted that Lucas, with his sharp instincts and unwavering sense of justice, would act quickly. The patrol car came to a screeching halt in front of the Maplewood police station. The sound of the tires on the pavement echoed sharply, drawing the attention of a few officers standing nearby. As Oliver exited the car, he pulled Anna along roughly, his grip tight on her arm. "Look what I've brought in," Oliver called out, his voice loud and boastful as he dragged Anna into the station. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with activity. Officers moved about, handling paperwork and responding to calls. But as Oliver's voice rang out, heads turned, and curious glances were cast in Anna's direction. "What's the story this time?" one officer muttered under his breath. Oliver smirked and gestured toward Anna. "Caught her walking around with this fancy necklace. Bet you anything it's stolen. Typical, right?" Anna, despite being handcuffed, maintained her composure. Her sharp gaze swept across the room, taking note of every face, every expression. She could see the mix of curiosity, doubt, and even disapproval in the eyes of some officers. Among them was Nathan, a younger officer known for his level-headed approach and sense of fairness. He stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "Oliver," Nathan said, his tone measured, "are you sure about this? Do you have any actual evidence, or is this just a hunch?" Oliver rolled his eyes and waved dismissively. "Evidence? Look at her. That necklace is worth more than most people's monthly salary. How could someone like her possibly afford it? I don't need more than that." Nathan crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "That's not how this works, Oliver. Suspicion isn't evidence. Did you even check for reports or confirm any descriptions before bringing her in?" Oliver's confidence faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. "Listen, Nathan," he said, his tone dripping with impatience. "I know what I'm doing. She'll have her chance to explain after we sort this out." Nathan glanced at Anna, who returned his gaze with a calm but resolute expression. Something about her demeanor didn't match Oliver's accusations, and Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Right," Nathan said quietly, his tone skeptical. "We'll see about that." As Oliver led Anna toward a holding cell, She remained silent, her mind focused. She didn't flinch as the cold metal door creaked open, nor did she hesitate as she stepped inside. The stark gray walls of the cell were uninviting, but Anna refused to let the environment diminish her resolve. Oliver stood outside the cell, his arms crossed, his expression full of self-satisfaction. "Take a seat," he said mockingly. "Think about all the bad decisions that led you here. Maybe you'll come up with a better story to tell when we get around to questioning you." Anna met his gaze, her calm composure unshaken. "The truth will come out, officer," she said firmly. "And when it does, you'll see just how wrong you are." Oliver chuckled dryly and turned on his heel, heading back toward his desk. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. From a distance, Nathan watched the interaction unfold. Unease etched across his face. Something didn't add up, and he couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that Oliver's actions were driven by prejudice rather than genuine police work. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Lucas sat in his office, sifting through reports when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression immediately darkened. The emergency signal from Anna's phone lit up his screen. Lucas's jaw tightened, and without a word he grabbed his jacket and strode out of the office. Lucas's mind raced as he made his way to the station. He trusted Anna implicitly, and knew she wouldn't use the signal unless it was serious. Whatever had happened, Lucas was determined to make things right and to ensure no one abused their power against the person he loved most. Lucas walked into the Maplewood police station with a quiet but commanding presence. His polished shoes clicked against the tiled floor, and every step seemed to carry the weight of his authority. Officers bustling about their work straightened instinctively upon noticing him, their expressions shifting from curiosity to apprehension. One officer near the front desk greeted him awkwardly. "Chief Lucas," he stammered. "We didn't know you were coming in today." Lucas didn't respond immediately, his piercing gaze sweeping across the room. "I received an emergency signal," he said, his voice calm but laced with an unmistakable edge. "I want to know why my wife, Anna, has been arrested and detained without any valid evidence." A wave of silence washed over the station. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their curiosity now mixed with tension. The weight of Lucas's words hung heavy in the air. At the center of the room, Oliver stood among a group of officers, retelling the events of Anna's arrest with exaggerated pride. He laughed lightly, his smugness evident as he gestured toward the holding area. "She thought she could outsmart me," he boasted, "but I saw right through her act." "Oliver," Lucas called out, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. Oliver froze mid-sentence, his smile faltering as he turned to see Lucas approaching. The sight of the police chief, his expression stern and unyielding, caused Oliver's confidence to waver. "See Captain Lucas," Oliver stuttered, his bravado crumbling under Lucas's intense scrutiny. "I didn't know you were here today." "That's right," Lucas replied coldly, his sharp eyes locked onto Oliver. "I wasn't planning to be here, but then I received an alert. Now, I hear my wife is being held in this station. I want you to explain, clearly and truthfully, why you thought it was appropriate to arrest her." Oliver took a deep breath, attempting to regain his composure. "Captain, she was wearing a necklace that seemed suspiciously valuable," he began, his tone defensive. "When I questioned her about it, she couldn't provide clear proof of its origin. And her attitude—" "Her attitude?" Lucas interrupted, his voice low but carrying a palpable weight. "Are you telling me you arrested someone based on nothing more than your personal assumptions and how they responded to your questions?" Oliver hesitated, his words stumbling as he tried to justify himself. "It wasn't just that, Captain. There have been recent jewelry thefts in the area and she matched the description." "I thought—" "You thought," Lucas said, his disappointment evident. "You thought without evidence. You thought without consideration for the law or the principles we're sworn to uphold. Tell me, Oliver, do you understand what our job is?" The room had grown eerily quiet, every officer's attention focused on the exchange. Oliver shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny, his earlier confidence reduced to shame. I was just trying to do my duty," he muttered. "Your duty," Lucas repeated, his tone icy. "Your duty is to protect the people of this city, not to abuse your authority or act on baseless prejudices. You've done nothing but dishonor this badge and the values it represents." Lucas turned his attention toward the holding cell. Behind the metal bars, Anna sat calmly, her back straight and her gaze unwavering. Despite the ordeal, she exuded a quiet strength that only deepened Lucas's resolve. He approached the cell door, his expression softening as he addressed her. "Anna," he said, his voice gentler now, "are you all right?" Anna stood and offered him a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Lucas," she replied, "but I think a few lessons need to be taught around here." Lucas nodded firmly. "You're absolutely right." He turned back to Oliver, his voice rising slightly. "Take the handcuffs off her, now." Oliver fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling as he unlocked the cuffs. Anna stepped out of the cell gracefully, her demeanor composed despite the humiliation she had endured. Lucas addressed the room, his voice commanding attention. "Let this be a lesson to everyone here. Our duty is to uphold justice, not to let bias and arrogance dictate our actions. If anyone in this department forgets that, they'll answer to me, and I promise the consequences will be severe." The officers nodded silently, a mix of shame and agreement in their expressions. Oliver, meanwhile, stood with his head lowered, his face flushed with embarrassment. Lucas led Anna out of the cell block, but before leaving the station, he paused and turned to Oliver one last time. "Meet me in my office after your shift," he said, his tone cutting. "This isn't over." As they walked out into the open air, Anna exhaled deeply, a faint sense of relief washing over her. Lucas glanced at her, his expression softening further. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said quietly. Anna gave him a reassuring smile. "I knew you'd come," she replied. "But this isn't just about me. It's about ensuring no one else has to endure the same." Lucas nodded, his determination renewed. "You're right, and I'll make sure of it." As Anna and Lucas left the station, the tension inside the building remained thick. Oliver sat at his desk, his shoulders hunched and his head bowed. His colleagues exchanged glances, whispering quietly among themselves. Some seemed uncomfortable, while others appeared to quietly agree with Lucas's stern reprimand. Nathan, the younger officer who had voiced his doubts earlier, approached Oliver cautiously. "You know," Nathan said, his tone firm but not unkind, "this could have gone a lot worse. You're lucky she's Chief Lucas's wife, or this would have escalated even further." Oliver scowled, frustration and humiliation mixing on his face. "I was doing my job," he snapped. "I had every right to question her. How was I supposed to know who she was?" Nathan crossed his arms, his expression serious. "That's the problem, Oliver. You weren't supposed to assume anything about her, or anyone else, for that matter. We're here to serve the people, not judge them." Oliver waved him off, muttering under his breath, "You don't understand." But Nathan's words stuck with him, lingering like an unwelcome shadow. Deep down, Oliver knew his actions had been driven by more than just professional judgment. They were fueled by his own biases, ones he had never truly questioned before. Meanwhile, back at their home, Anna sat with Lucas in the quiet of their living room. The soft glow of a table lamp illuminated their faces as they discussed the day's events. "Lucas," Anna began, her voice steady but tinged with frustration, "this wasn't just about me. Oliver didn't target me because I'm your wife. He targeted me because of his prejudices. If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." Lucas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're absolutely right," he replied. "This isn't just an isolated incident. It's a symptom of something deeper, and it needs to be addressed." Anna's gaze softened as she placed a hand on Lucas's arm. "I know you'll handle this," she said quietly. "You've always stood for what's right, no matter how difficult it is." Lucas squeezed her hand gently, a determined look in his eyes. "I won't let this slide," he promised. The next morning, Lucas arrived at the station earlier than usual. The atmosphere was subdued, and the officers were still processing the events of the previous day. As Lucas entered his office, he called for Oliver to join him. Oliver stepped inside hesitantly, his usual arrogance replaced with visible unease. He stood stiffly before Lucas's desk, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Sit down," Lucas said, his tone calm but firm. Oliver obeyed, lowering himself into the chair across from Lucas. "Do you understand the gravity of what happened yesterday?" Lucas asked, leaning forward slightly. Oliver hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Lucas's sharp gaze didn't waver. "This isn't just about you arresting my wife, Oliver. This is about the fact that you allowed your biases to influence your actions. That necklace was enough for you to assume guilt, and that assumption led you to abuse your authority. Do you see the problem with that? I do, Oliver said quietly, though his voice carried a hint of defensiveness. But I didn't mean any harm. I thought I was doing my duty. Your duty, Lucas repeated, his voice growing colder. Your duty is to protect and serve every member of this community, not just the ones you deem worthy. Your duty is to uphold the law with fairness and integrity, not to let your personal judgments cloud your judgment. Oliver shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze dropping to the floor. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his expression stern but composed. I'm suspending you, effective immediately, he said. You'll be required to complete 6 months of anti-bias training and psychological counseling. During that time, you won't wear the uniform or carry a badge. If you successfully complete the program and demonstrate genuine change, I'll consider allowing you to return. But make no mistake, this is your only chance. Oliver's eyes widened, and his face flushed with a mix of anger and shame. Captain, please, he began, his voice trembling. I've been with this department for over a decade. I've made mistakes, but this is too harsh. Lucas's gaze hardened. Too harsh, he repeated. What's harsh is arresting someone without evidence. What's harsh is abusing the trust that this badge represents. If you can't accept responsibility for your actions, then you have no place in this department. Oliver swallowed hard, his protests dying on his lips. He knew there was no arguing with Lucas's resolve. Consider this a wake-up call, Lucas continued. You have 6 months to prove that you can change. If you can't, you'll be out of this force for good. Oliver nodded slowly, his face pale. I understand, he murmured. Lucas watched him for a moment longer before dismissing him. As Oliver left the office, the weight of his situation settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he had no choice but to face it. As Oliver left Lucas's office, the gravity of his suspension hit him hard. The station, once a place where he carried himself with unchecked confidence, now felt cold and unwelcoming. His colleagues avoided eye contact, and whispers followed him as he walked past. For the first time, Oliver felt truly isolated. Later that evening, Oliver sat alone in his small apartment. The sounds of the city hummed faintly in the background, but his mind was consumed by the day's events. His badge and service weapon sat on the kitchen counter, stark reminders of what he stood to lose. He thought back to his upbringing, to the prejudices he had absorbed growing up in a household that valued rigid ideals. His father's voice echoed in his mind, saying things like, "People like them can't be trusted, and you have to be tough to keep order." Oliver sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. He had always seen himself as a man of duty, but now he began to question what that duty truly meant. For the first time, the realization that he might have been wrong all along began to creep in. The next morning, Oliver attended the first session of his mandated anti-bias training program. The room was small and nondescript, with a circle of chairs set up around a simple wooden table. A handful of other participants, all from different professions, sat quietly, avoiding eye contact. Dr. Patel, the program facilitator, entered the room and introduced herself. She was a middle-aged woman with a calm but commanding presence. Her sharp eyes seemed to look straight through each participant, and yet her voice carried warmth and understanding. "Welcome," she said, taking a seat. "The fact that you're here means you've taken the first step toward understanding and addressing the biases that influence your actions. This journey won't be easy, but it's necessary, not just for the people around you, but for yourself." Oliver shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of what to expect. Dr. Patel continued, "Let's start by sharing a bit about ourselves and why we're here. This isn't about judgment, it's about reflection and growth. Who would like to go first?" A long silence followed, broken only when a man in his 40s raised his hand. He introduced himself as Hector, a construction worker who admitted to harboring biases that had affected his relationships with coworkers. One by one, the participants shared their stories, each one exposing the flaws and struggles that had led them to this room. When it was Oliver's turn, he hesitated, the weight of his past pressing down on him. "I'm Oliver," he began, his voice low. "I'm a police officer. Recently I arrested someone because, well, I thought they looked suspicious. Turned out I was wrong, and now I'm here." Dr. Patel nodded thoughtfully. And what made you think they were suspicious, Oliver? Oliver's jaw tightened, and he looked down at his hands. I don't know, he admitted after a pause. It's just the way I was raised, I guess. I grew up hearing things, believing things that I never questioned. Maybe it's just how I've always been. Dr. Patel's gaze softened slightly. Thank you for sharing that, she said. It's important to recognize where these thoughts and behaviors come from, but it's even more important to challenge them. That's what we're here to do. Over the next several weeks, Oliver's training involved both group discussions and individual exercises designed to confront his biases head-on. One particularly impactful exercise involved role-playing scenarios, where he experienced the kind of discrimination he had perpetrated. In one scenario, Oliver was asked to play the role of a job applicant facing rejection after rejection, despite being qualified. The cold stares, dismissive tones, and subtle looks of judgment he received from the mock interviewers cut deeper than he had expected. By the end of the exercise, Oliver sat quietly in the corner of the room, his hands trembling. For the first time, he felt the sting of injustice from the other side. During the debrief, Dr. Patel approached him. How did that make you feel, Oliver? She asked. It felt awful, Oliver admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Like no matter what I said or did, it wouldn't matter. Like they'd already made up their minds about me. Dr. Patel nodded. That's what many people feel every day. And your actions, even if unintentional, can contribute to that. The question is, now that you know how it feels, what will you do about it? Oliver didn't answer immediately. He knew the path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of determination to change, not because he was being forced to, but because he wanted to. That night, Oliver sat at his desk with a blank sheet of paper in front of him. Dr. Patel had assigned the group to write a letter to their past selves, a task designed to reflect on how far they'd come and where they wanted to go. After several minutes of staring at the page, Oliver picked up a pen and began to write. Sitting alone at his desk late into the night, Oliver poured his thoughts onto the paper. The assignment to write a letter to his past self had initially felt unnecessary, even foolish. But as the words began to flow, it became a deeply personal moment of reflection. Dear Oliver, I'm writing this to you, the person who once believed he always knew best. You thought your badge made you invincible, that it gave you the right to judge others without truly understanding them. You grew up in a world where prejudice was the norm, and you never questioned it. You took those lessons into adulthood, into your career, and into the lives of others. But now I see it clearly. Every assumption you made, every judgment you passed, it wasn't justice. It was ignorance dressed as authority. It hurt others. It hurt you. This isn't a letter of blame, but a reminder that it's not too late to change. Change is hard, but it's necessary. Every step forward won't just make you better. It will make the world around you better. You don't have to stay the person you were. Be someone people can trust, someone who listens, someone who understands. It's a long road ahead, but take it one step at a time. With hope, your future self. Oliver stared at the letter for a moment after finishing it, his hand trembling slightly. He hadn't realized how much of his own pain and regret he had been carrying until now. The next morning, Oliver shared his letter during the group session, his voice breaking at times as he read aloud. When he finished, the room was silent, not out of judgment, but out of a shared understanding of the weight of his words. That's a powerful step, Dr. Patel said with a small, encouraging smile. But remember, this journey isn't just about self-reflection. It's about action. How will you take what you've learned and apply it to the world around you? Oliver nodded solemnly, knowing she was right. His training was far from over, and he was determined to prove, both to himself and to those he had wronged, that he could truly change. The following week, Oliver participated in an empathy exercise that left an indelible mark on him. The group was tasked with listening to the personal stories of individuals who had faced systemic injustice and prejudice. One speaker, Sandra, a middle-aged black woman, shared her story with unwavering strength. I worked hard all my life, Sandra began, but every time I tried to move up, I was turned away. They didn't say it outright, but I could see it in their eyes, in the way they spoke to me. They thought I didn't belong simply because of my skin color. Her voice faltered slightly, but she pressed on. For years, I questioned my worth. I wondered if they were right. But then I realized the problem wasn't me. It was them, their biases, their refusal to see me for who I am. As Sandra spoke, Oliver felt a lump form in his throat. He thought back to the countless times he had made similar judgments without realizing the harm they caused. Another speaker, Hector, followed. His voice was steady, but his words carried the weight of loss. My father lived in this country for over 20 years, Hector said. He worked hard, paid his taxes, and followed the law. But one day the police came to our home and deported him like he was nothing. I remember the look in his eyes. Not fear, but betrayal. He believed in justice, but justice didn't believe in him. The room was silent as Hector finished, his pain palpable. Oliver couldn't ignore the overwhelming realization that he had been part of a system that perpetuated such injustices. After the session, Oliver approached Sandra and Hector, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Thank you for sharing your stories," he said. I can't imagine the pain you've been through, but I want to do better. I need to." Sandra studied him for a moment before offering a small nod. "Acknowledging it is the first step," she said. "But the real work is what comes after." Hector added, "If you're serious about change, don't just talk about it, show it." Their words stayed with Oliver as he continued his training. Each day brought new challenges, but it also brought new insights. He began to see the world through a lens he had never considered before, a lens of understanding and accountability. At one point, Dr. Patel asked the group to reflect on a critical question: what will you do to make amends for the harm you've caused? For Oliver, the answer was clear. He couldn't undo the past, but he could use his experiences to create a better future for himself, for the department, and for the community he had once failed to serve. That evening, Oliver wrote another note, not to himself, but as a commitment. "I will be better, not because it's expected of me, but because it's the right thing to do. I will listen, I will learn, and I will take responsibility for my actions. I will not stop until I've earned back the trust I lost." It wasn't just a promise to the program or the people he had wronged. It was a promise to himself. After weeks of therapy and training, Oliver began to see tangible changes within himself. For the first time, he didn't shy away from acknowledging his mistakes. But just as he started to feel like he was making progress, a new challenge emerged, one that would test the depth of his commitment to change. One afternoon, during a community workshop organized by the training program, Oliver found himself face-to-face with someone he hadn't expected to see: Anna. She had been invited to the workshop as a guest speaker to share her experiences with systemic injustice. Standing at the front of the room, Anna exuded the same poise and confidence she had displayed the day Oliver had wrongfully arrested her. Oliver's heart sank as he recognized her. He felt a surge of shame, his mind replaying the events of that day. He considered leaving the room, but something stopped him. This was a moment he needed to face, no matter how uncomfortable it made him. Anna began speaking, her voice steady and clear. "Injustice doesn't always come in the form of grand, overt acts," she said. "Sometimes it's subtle. It's in the assumptions people make, the judgments they pass, and the way they wield power without accountability." Her words were piercing, and Oliver felt as though they were directed squarely at him. Anna continued, "When I was arrested, it wasn't just humiliating. It was a reminder of how easily someone's dignity can be stripped away. The officer who arrested me didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a suspect, based solely on his own biases." Oliver lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. The room was silent, the weight of Anna's words settling over everyone present. "But," Anna added, her tone softening slightly, "change is possible. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it can happen if we're willing to confront our own flaws and do the work to make things right." When she finished, the room erupted into quiet applause. Anna stepped down from the podium, her presence still commanding attention. Oliver hesitated for a moment before standing. His legs felt heavy as he approached her, each step weighted with the enormity of his guilt. "Anna," he began, his voice low but earnest, "I don't even know where to start. What I did to you was wrong, beyond wrong. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment, and I failed you in every way. Anna regarded him quietly, her expression unreadable. I've been in therapy, training, Oliver continued, his voice trembling. I've been trying to unlearn everything that brought me to that moment. I know an apology doesn't erase what I did, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I'll never stop working to make sure no one else has to go through what you did. For a long moment, Anna didn't speak. Then she nodded slightly. Thank you for saying that, she said. I hope you understand that this isn't just about me. If you're serious about change, it has to extend beyond an apology. It has to show in everything you do. I understand, Oliver said, his voice resolute, and I'm committed to proving that I can do better, not just to you, but to everyone. Anna's gaze softened slightly. Good, she said simply before walking away. That interaction marked a turning point for Oliver. It wasn't just about confronting the harm he had caused. It was about turning that confrontation into meaningful action. He threw himself into the training program with renewed determination, taking on leadership roles during group discussions and actively seeking out opportunities to engage with the community. One such opportunity came during a community listening session held at a local community center. Residents were invited to share their concerns and experiences with local law enforcement. Oliver volunteered to help facilitate the event, knowing that it was a chance to begin rebuilding trust. As people stood up to speak, Oliver listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of their stories. An elderly man recounted how he had been stopped and questioned countless times despite never committing a crime. A young woman described how her brother had been unfairly profiled and mistreated. Each story was a painful reminder of the system Oliver had once upheld without question. But instead of retreating into defensiveness, he leaned into the discomfort, acknowledging the role he had played in perpetuating those injustices. When it was his turn to speak, Oliver addressed the room with humility. I've been part of the problem, he admitted, his voice steady but filled with emotion. For too long, I allowed my biases to guide my actions, and I hurt people because of it. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to take responsibility for the harm I've caused. His words were met with a mix of skepticism and cautious optimism. While some in the audience remained wary, others seemed moved by his sincerity. After the session, Sandra, one of the speakers Oliver had met earlier in his training, approached him. You've come a long way, she said, her tone thoughtful. But the real test is what you do next. Oliver nodded, her words resonating deeply. I know, he replied. This isn't about proving myself, it's about making a real difference. Sandra offered him a small smile. Then keep going, she said. The road to change is long, but it's worth it. Oliver's path toward redemption continued, but it was not without its challenges. While his efforts in the training program and the community workshops were significant, he knew that real change required more than public gestures. It required him to confront the personal truths he had long avoided. During one of his therapy sessions with Dr. Patel, she pushed him to delve deeper into the roots of his biases. Oliver, she said gently but firmly, you've made great progress. But understanding why you've held on to these prejudices for so long is essential to truly overcoming them. Tell me about your upbringing. What shaped your views? Oliver hesitated, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I grew up in a household where people were divided into us and them, he admitted finally. My father was a strong influence. He always said things like, you can't trust those people, or they're not like us. Dr. Patel nodded, encouraging him to continue. I didn't question it back then, Oliver said, his voice growing quieter. It was just the way things were. And when I became a police officer, I think I carried those ideas with me without even realizing it. Did you ever feel conflicted about those beliefs? Dr. Patel asked. Oliver looked down at his hands, his jaw tightening. No, he admitted. Not at first. I thought I was being fair and doing my job. But now, looking back, I can see how wrong I was. I judged people before I even knew them, and I justified it by telling myself it was part of the job. Dr. Patel leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. The fact that you can recognize this now is a critical step, she said. But recognition alone isn't enough. What will you do with this understanding? I want to be better, Oliver said without hesitation. Not just for myself, but for the people I've hurt and the community I serve. The next phase of his training introduced Oliver to a powerful exercise, a reenactment of his own actions. He was tasked with stepping into the shoes of someone he had once wrongfully profiled, experiencing firsthand what it felt like to be on the receiving end of suspicion and prejudice. For the exercise, Oliver played the role of a man stopped and questioned by a police officer for looking out of place in a well-to-do neighborhood. The officer, portrayed by a fellow participant, treated him with a cold and dismissive tone, repeatedly asking for identification and questioning his presence in the area. Although Oliver knew it was a simulation, the experience struck a nerve. The officer's probing questions and judgmental stares left him feeling small and powerless. By the end of the reenactment, Oliver's hands were trembling. He sat in the debriefing circle, his head bowed. "That was overwhelming," he admitted. "I thought I understood what it felt like, but experiencing it firsthand, it's so much worse than I imagined." Sandra, who had been observing the exercise, nodded knowingly. "That's what so many of us face every day," she said. "The constant questioning, the subtle looks, the feeling that no matter what you say, you'll never be seen as enough." Oliver met her gaze, his voice filled with regret. "I never realized how much damage I was causing. I'm so sorry." "Sorry, this is a start," Sandra replied, "but it's what you do next that matters." Fueled by his deepening understanding, Oliver became more proactive in his efforts to repair the harm he had caused. He took on additional responsibilities within the training program, helping to facilitate discussions and mentor newer participants. One evening, during a session focused on systemic change, Oliver stood before the group and shared his journey. "I used to think I was doing my job by following my instincts," he began. "But what I've learned is that my instincts weren't rooted in justice. They were rooted in bias. And those biases didn't just affect me, they affected everyone I interacted with." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But the hardest part of this journey hasn't been admitting I was wrong. It's been realizing how much harm I've caused and knowing that I can never fully undo it. All I can do now is work every day to be better, to listen more, and to ensure that my actions align with the values I've sworn to uphold." The room was silent for a moment before one of the newer participants raised their hand. "What keeps you going?" they asked. "What makes you believe you can change?" Oliver thought about the question, his gaze steady. "Because I have to," he said simply. "If I don't, then all the harm I've caused was for nothing. And if I can help even one person feel safer, feel seen, then every step of this journey is worth it." Outside the program, Oliver began to take these lessons into his community. He volunteered at local events, spoke at schools about the importance of empathy and inclusion, and continued attending listening sessions where he heard firsthand accounts of the struggles faced by marginalized groups. Through these efforts, Oliver began to rebuild trust, not just with others, but with himself. He no longer carried the same arrogance that had once defined him. Instead, he carried a quiet determination to do better every single day. Oliver's journey serves as a powerful testament to the idea that change is not only possible, but essential. This transformation from an officer blinded by prejudice to a man actively working to right his wrongs offers a poignant lesson about the impact of self-awareness and the courage it takes to confront one's flaws. The story illustrates the weight of accountability. Oliver had to face the consequences of his actions, not only through external disciplinary measures, but also through the painful process of internal reflection. It wasn't an easy path. There were moments of shame, doubt, and discomfort, but it was precisely these challenges that led to his growth. Anna's resilience and grace, even in the face of blatant injustice, highlight the importance of standing firm in the truth. Her ability to maintain her dignity while advocating for accountability underscores the strength it takes to confront a system that often favors those in power. Her forgiveness of Oliver wasn't immediate or unconditional. It was contingent upon his genuine effort to change. This dynamic reminds us that forgiveness is a gift, one that must be earned through meaningful actions. Lucas, as a leader, exemplified integrity and the courage to hold even his own team accountable. His unwavering commitment to justice set the tone for change, both within the police department and the community at large. It was his actions that laid the foundation for Oliver's redemption and ensured that others in the force understood the importance of fairness and empathy. This narrative also sheds light on the systemic nature of prejudice and the harm it causes, not just to individuals but to entire communities. Oliver's biases were not born in isolation. They were learned behaviors passed down from family and reinforced by his environment. Recognizing this systemic aspect is crucial to understanding that while individuals must take responsibility for their actions, society as a whole must also work toward dismantling these harmful structures. The story's resolution is both hopeful and realistic. Oliver's transformation is ongoing, a reminder that change isn't a destination, but a continuous journey. His efforts to rebuild trust, foster empathy, and advocate for inclusivity demonstrate the power of perseverance and the importance of second chances. The lesson here is clear. True change begins with self-reflection, grows through accountability, and thrives on consistent effort. It's not enough to recognize our flaws. We must actively work to overcome them. This journey requires humility, courage, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right. If this story moves you, we want to hear your thoughts. Was it inspiring? If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you thought it was amazing, comment with a 2. And share your own stories of resilience, redemption, or lessons learned. We'd love to hear them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more meaningful stories like this one. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Together, we can inspire change, one story at a time.